The Israeli military has intensified its attacks on Gaza, killing at least 80 Palestinians in the enclave in the last 24 hours. 22 of them were children. In a deadly wave of violence, Israeli jets have bombed the strip from the north to the south, with at least 50 Palestinians killed in northern Gaza's Jabalia. These were the scenes of the aftermath of that attack in Jabalia, which left large craters and a completely collapsed building, with Palestinians digging through the rubble to find bodies and survivors. At the Indonesian hospital in Beit Lahaya, bodies littered the corridors, with reports from survivors saying a disabled man, a pregnant woman, and many children were among those killed. One eyewitness to the attack, Hadi Mokbel, told Reuters this: "They fired 2 rockets. They told us the house of Mokbel. We came running. We saw body parts on the ground, children killed, the woman killed, and a baby killed. His head was exploded like a flower. Oh my God. He is 2 months old. Does God say so? God does not say so. We accepted the famine, and they, Israelis, are happy. They eat and drink." Israel has also been attacking hospitals again. In the south of the Strip, the European hospital in Khan Yunis was bombed on Tuesday, with eyewitnesses saying 9 missiles slammed into the hospital and its courtyard. This CCTV footage from the hospital courtyard shows the moment one of those missiles struck in an area adjacent to the hospital. You can see people running from the sound of the bomb before an explosion sends bodies and rubble flying through the air. The afterflame of the missile then burns for a while before leaving a large crater. Moments later, you can see scores of Palestinians fleeing the area in case of further missile strikes. 28 people have been reported killed in that attack, with a further 70 injured. Reports have also emerged of Israeli drones firing on rescue workers attempting to help those injured in the bombing. British surgeon Tom Potokar was working in the European hospital when the missiles struck. He told Channel 4 News what happened.
We'd finished in the operating theatre, just come back to the residence, which is within the compound of the hospital, and there was 4 or 5 enormous explosions. No pre-warning. Often you hear drones overhead first or aircraft approaching, but this time nothing. Smoke filling the air, filling the rooms. Ran downstairs. There was a huge crater right outside the entrance to the hospital, with some wounded lying around that. And then further damage within the hospital, a lot of the walls, the ceiling, the operating theatre area, rubble on the floor.
Do you have any idea why the hospital might have been targeted?
No.
A Palestinian cameraman working for the BBC was also at the hospital when it was bombed.
A BBC colleague was carrying out an interview when the rockets landed. Here, he tries to comfort children. In terror, they call out the prayer for the dead. Our colleague was wounded, but not seriously. For his safety, we're not revealing his name. Every day of this war, he's captured its cruelty.
Now, Israel has claimed responsibility for the attack. In this video, the Israeli military assert that the European hospital contained a number of Hamas tunnels, and claims the bombing raid was targeting a command and control center beneath the medical facility. And the Times of Israel has reported that Hamas leader in Gaza, Mohammed Sinwar, so that's the brother of killed Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, was their target. Now, that, of course, would not be a valid excuse for killing dozens of civilians in a hospital. But separate from that, Israel's excuse for its war crimes doesn't stack up for another reason. As geolocator Anno Nemo pointed out, verified by the New York Times, the building in the IDF's video is not the European hospital, but rather the Jenin Secondary School for boys, also in Khan Yunis, but located several hundred meters away. The BBC also picked up on that hole in the IDF story.
Israel says it targeted an underground terrorist infrastructure at the hospital site, but they didn't provide any evidence of this. They did release this video, which they claimed was of the European hospital, but that's incorrect. It's actually a school a few hundred meters away, and we've reached out to the Israeli army for comments about this, but we've not yet heard back.
The Israeli attack on the hospital, as well as across the Strip, follows pressure from the White House on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree a ceasefire and end the war. On Monday, White House envoy Steve Witkoff publicly accused Israel of prolonging the war in Gaza at the expense of the remaining hostages held there. Those comments followed the release of US-Israeli hostage Edan Alexander from Gaza. his freedom was a result of direct negotiations between the Trump administration and Hamas, cutting Israel out of the talks. And US President Donald Trump is also currently touring the Middle East, of course, forming closer economic and political bonds with Arab leaders across the region. He won't, however, be visiting Israel. That's potentially an uncomfortable situation for Netanyahu, whose genocidal actions in Gaza are now clearly the principal source of destabilization in the region. For now, though, the Israeli Prime Minister is undeterred, and he's pledged to continue Israel's operation in Gaza with full force in the coming days. Ash, we are, I suppose, beginning, it feels like we're entering a new phase, doesn't it? Because in some ways, there's a Groundhog Day element of the coverage of Gaza, which is Israel kills civilians, makes excuses, those excuses fall apart. It does seem like Israel have become more explicit about their intentions to sort of clear out the Gaza Strip. And there are at least certain sort of media organizations, actually politicians as well. So there are sort of backbench politicians writing to the government. It seems like what Israel is doing is becoming more explicit, although it should have been explicit to everyone for the past 18 months. And there is a bit more pushback than we might have seen before. What's your take on what's going on?
So I think you're totally right to identify that there has been a shift in terms of the editorial positions being taken by a fair amount of media here in the Anglosphere. So whether it's the Financial Times, who produced an editorial saying it's time for Israel to stop, they've gone too far, to a shift in tone at the BBC, the Guardian, the Times. I think you're right to say that the withholding of aid, the imposition, the creation of a famine, and the renewed assault on civilians and civilian infrastructure has resulted in, I don't know, a greater willingness to call out some of the obvious on the part of Western media. The problem is that this was always obvious. And I think if you go back to some of our coverage from October, November 2023, the reason why we were talking about ethnic cleansing, forcible transfer, at the time we were talking about it beginning to look genocidal and genocidal language. Now, of course, we just unequivocally use the word genocide. That's not a product of, well, we've taken this ideological position and we were going to say it anyway. That's because if you looked at the facts on the ground of what was happening in Gaza, those were the conclusions we were forced to draw. The reason why the rest of the media wasn't following suit was because in the wake of October 7th, they didn't want to appear anti-Semitic or callous or unfeeling to the loss of life on that day. So basically, there was a political sentiment that the Western press wholesale adopted. They were scared of pro-Israel lobbyists. They were scared of being called anti-Semitic. They were scared of basically, well-placed individuals who wield power and influence sitting on their head. So they refused to open their eyes to Israel's intentions and actions in the Gaza Strip. Now that time has gone on, and it's obvious that Israel has no interest in the safe return of hostages. They're quite happy for hostages to die under the same rubble that kills Palestinians. The scales has begun to fall from their eyes somewhat. I do want to draw your attention very quickly to something that Netanyahu himself said this week in front of the Knesset. He said, we're destroying more homes in Gaza. So the same way you might have another prime minister say, well, look, we're delivering on our campaign promises. For Netanyahu, that's saying, look, we're destroying more homes in Gaza. I'm delivering for you. He also said, and I quote, the only inevitable outcome will be the wish of Gazans to emigrate outside the Gaza Strip. So the demolitions of homes in Gaza, this is something that the Israeli government and Israeli supporters worldwide have long denied. Now Netanyahu is admitting that the purpose of those demolitions is to facilitate the forcible transfer of the Palestinians of Gaza outside of the land of historic Palestine. Right? It is an admission of a war crime. He also said that he would consider making aid available on the condition that Gazans receiving it would not return to the areas that they came from. Again, a clear admission of a war crime. Now, where is that being reported in the English-speaking media? The only place I could find it was the Jewish Chronicle this week. It is massively underreported. So you do have this blocking of the ears to what Netanyahu himself is saying. It is not a matter of opinion that Netanyahu intends and is carrying out war crimes. It is a matter of fact. If you look at what's happening on the ground and you look at what's happening, what's coming out of his own mouth. So while the media's position has shifted somewhat, I don't think it adequately reflects the reality, because there is this still a tendency to try and equivocate or try and create a false balance to say, oh, maybe it's war crimes, maybe it's not. I mean, no, it is. Netanyahu all but uses the word war crimes, right? It's the only thing he stopped short of saying is, yes, I am committing these very specific breaches of the Geneva Conventions.